Hello, I'm Bernadette Banner. I am a dress historian and YouTube content creator. I am also a Skillshare teacher. Today I am traveling into the world of fantasy to analyze some of the costumes that we see in our favorite films and TV shows. Fantasy is really interesting to explore from a creative point of view because rather than having to look at and follow the evidence that exists to us from our timeline of reality, it gives designers an opportunity to build their own world and establish their own rules to follow. So the first show that we have to analyze today is Penny Dreadful. This is one of my favorite shows. So this isn't clearly meant to be our present universe. It is some sort of parallel 1891 London. You've got werewolves and you've got vampires. I find the clothes in this show incredibly aesthetically pleasing. One of my favorite gowns in the entire show is this black gown that Vanessa wears that looks very reminiscent of the Edwardian lingerie gown, which they've made the gown black. These lingerie gowns were almost always white or very, very light colors and made of very delicate lace. It is not made of lace. It looks like it's made of gimp cord or soutache or something that's stitched onto a net. It's very reminiscent in material and in silhouette of these Edwardian lingerie gowns, but it's in black. Keeping with the gothic nature of the show, I just thought that was really brilliant and very fitting to her character.
I've never seen you wear white.
Not my color.
Penny Dreadful, the clothes definitely cater to the inner goth trash aesthetic, which I very much appreciate, with, of course, that little bit of a late Victorian flair, which is also quite fun. So the next show that we have is The Nevers. I absolutely adore this show. It's in this world where superpowers exist and aliens exist, and it's very sci-fi fantasy. This show went so hard with the historical influence where they really didn't have to, and it just made me so excited, especially in terms of silhouette. That is like, when you look at the picture from afar, you can just tell that this is the 1890s, and that's something that really helps to set the world of a show. This show takes place in 1899, so you can see Mary has got larger sleeves. They're not quite as voluminous as they would have been in the middle of the century, but it's almost as if she's kept this shirtwaist that she's purchased a couple of years ago and she's still wearing it, which is an extremely nice nod to history because people don't just discard all of their clothes and buy new ones with every year of changing fashion. You are re-wearing your clothes because they are a little bit more expensive than fast fashion allows them to be today. One thing that I really appreciate with The Nevers specifically is that not only are most of the clothes believable to have existed in an 1890s that might be familiar to us, even on our timeline, the actors are properly understructured, which is something that historical reproductions of things don't often do. They say, oh, we're not going to have quite the right corset shape or quite enough padding, because why? Like, it doesn't make sense to our modern mindsets towards fashion, but making those little tiny foundational tweaks really does a world of difference. Not only are the clothes really well done, the actors themselves, you can tell most of the actors really understand how to move in period clothes because it's not hard, it just often takes a little bit of adaptation to get used to the fact that you've got a long skirt and how you need to move your legs to make sure that that moves around you, especially because this is such a physically demanding show. It's kind of amazing the level of adaptation that some of these actors have achieved with their properly understructured Victorian garments. It was just like, it was mind-bending for me to watch this. It was like a feat. The interesting thing about Harry Potter is that within the world of the story, there is a very definitive divide between the wizarding world and the muggle world. So it stands to reason that the wizard world, the fashions that they wear are very much removed from the fashions that we are familiar with in muggle society in the 1990s. And wizard fashion almost seems to have picked up different elements from different times of muggle fashion. It is very interesting to look at all these little different pieces, these little breadcrumbs that have been picked up throughout the entire timeline of wizard history and how it's almost as if the wizard timeline progresses at a different rate.
Harry,
So Sirius Black, he's still wearing what looks like a modern button-down shirt. He's wearing what looks like a modern blazer, something that you'd find in the middle of the 20th century. It's not a historical waistcoat, it could be late Victorian. He's got this definitely Victorian watch chain going on. He's not plucked out of the Victorian period. Rita Skeeter is the character who presumably strives to be a bit more fashionable. She's wearing something that is bright and it's loud, it's not muted in tones. We also don't really get an understanding of what's fashionable in the wizarding world. A lot of the characters that we see are obviously in institutions. They are in Hogwarts, they are in the Ministry of Magic, but we don't have like the clearest sense of what high fashion is. Rita Skeeter is reading Vogue and whatever the wizarding equivalent of that is and adopting presumably what high fashion wizards are wearing. This like power suit look with the big feathery cuffs and the bright green satin. Correct me if I'm wrong, but to me it looks like 1980s. Bridgerton has been much discussed here on the YouTubes. This is the next show that we are analyzing today. Bridgerton is in a realm of anything goes. It's escapist. It's some other time. It is once upon a time, and that's kind of the effect that the costumes are meant to have. It's just trying to have a bit of fun, and it does that with the story and with the clothes. Bridgerton is set in fantasy. The designers, the production people, everyone involved in the show has been very clear about the fact that this is fantasy, this is Jane Austen core, this is fantastical representation of Jane Austen's early 19th century, this Regency period. It is not meant to reproduce reality whatsoever. There's an actual quote that says it is meant to be aspirational, which I think is fun. The only thing that really echoes historical fashion in this is the silhouette. They've all got those Jane Austen-esque high-waisted gowns and the long, loose, lightweight skirts. Some of them are not lightweight, some of them are very heavy silk. So in terms of the style of gown, they're pulling clearly from the early 19th century. Just at that turn of the century period, the waistline of the gowns is very, very high up and gradually lowers bit by bit by bit as we get further into the 19th century. It is a wild misconception that historically there was no such thing as bright color. You can achieve very bright colors with natural dyes because aniline chemical dyes are only introduced starting from about the middle of the 19th century, so they wouldn't have been a thing in this hypothetical Regency time period. Not that it matters because this is not our modern reality of the Regency, but bright colors are most certainly able to be achieved, especially for these upper classes, in these upper class situations where sometimes the dyes would have been more expensive or it would have required more dye or multiple dyes to achieve that bright of a color.
Your dresses have arrived. It's quite ravishing.
I have a lot of opinions about our next show to analyze today, and that is Game of Thrones. This show is set entirely in a fantasy realm. It is some parallel universe in an undefined time period that is kind of medieval, kind of 16th century, kind of just like Once Upon a Time and Far Away. However, I maintain that this show is one of the best examples of historical accuracy. Game of Thrones follows a very clear set of rules, and these rules are very heavily based in logic and believable realities. So we can think about fibers and materials, what the clothes are made from. We can think about dyes, which affect the colors of the clothes. Winterfell, for example, these people are wearing a lot of blacks, browns, dark colors, where those are the dyes that they would have access to. They might not have access to a lot of plant dyes because a lot of their soil is covered in snow most of the year, so maybe they're using things like oak gall, which comes from oak trees, which could be used to make black and dark dyes. We can also think a lot about the cut and the silhouette of clothes. That reflects a lot about what these characters have to do. We see Cersei is often wearing these large sleeves and these long gowns, kind of reminiscent of the 16th century, these Tudor gowns with the long sleeves that you would see in Tudor courts. So like high society Tudor. That is fine for someone like Cersei, who is royalty and she's just floofing around her castle all day and just, has to look nice and graceful and pretty. Someone, for example, like Arya Stark, who in later seasons ends up roaming around all of Westeros and living in the streets. She's not wearing a gown with long sleeves. As nice and aesthetic and as pretty as that would look on screen, the designers are not putting her in a gown like that because it's just not practical.
I wonder what it would feel like to wear those pretty dresses. To be the Lady of Winterfell.
Although Game of Thrones is by no means a period piece, we know that. This is the most obvious thing in the world simply by watching the introduction sequence. This show still does an incredible job at following a set of pre-established rules of dress, which is fundamentally really all that reproducing historical periods is all about. Thank you very much for joining me on this little exploration into the wonderful world of fantasy costuming and how that relates to various historical eras that we might recognize today. You can join me on my Skillshare course on the basics of hand sewing if you want to learn how to perhaps make a garment like this yourself. Click the link down below and hopefully I'll see you there.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest videos.